Welcome to this video on the RED model for critical thinking. On the left, we have an assumption, represented as a rough, sketchy outline. This is where most thinking starts, unfinished, potentially fragile, and lacking clarity. In the middle, we see the process, the wireframe of a diamond. This represents the structural rigor of the RED framework, where we apply logic to give our thoughts shape and stability. Finally, on the right, we see reality, a brilliant, high-resolution emerald. This is the goal of critical thinking, to transform raw assumptions into polished, actionable truths. The RED framework, developed by Pearson, stands for recognizing assumptions, evaluating arguments, and drawing conclusions. It is the gold standard for high-stakes decision-making because it forces us to move beyond gut feelings. Instead of accepting the sketch at face value, we peel back the layers, test the structural integrity of the logic, and only then do we arrive at a conclusion that shines with clarity and precision. Throughout this session, we will explore how this systematic approach moves us from the foggy world of maybe to the high-resolution reality of informed leadership. The blueprint for clear thinking, the funnel approach. To understand the mechanics of the RED model, we must look at the blueprint for clear thinking. This framework was specifically developed by the Pearson Corporation as part of the Watson-Glaser critical thinking appraisal. It acts as a cognitive funnel. At the top, we are bombarded with a chaotic mix of information, biases, and noise. Phase 1 is about recognizing assumptions. Here, we must be intellectually honest and ask, what are we taking for granted? This is the stage where we separate facts from beliefs. As the information moves deeper into the funnel, we reach Phase 2. Evaluating arguments. This isn't just about whether we like an idea, it's about assessing the quality, logic, and evidence behind it. We look for holes in the reasoning and weigh conflicting viewpoints without emotional bias. Finally, at the narrowest point of the funnel, we reach Phase 3, drawing conclusions. This is the synthesis stage, where we form well-reasoned, evidence-based judgments. By moving through these three phases sequentially, we ensure that our final decision isn't just a reaction to the loudest voice in the room, but a refined product of a disciplined mind. This funnel ensures that no matter how complex the input, the output is always logical and robust. Phase 1. Recognizing assumptions, the iceberg. Moving into the first deep dive, let's talk about recognizing assumptions. We use the iceberg metaphor because in any argument, the most dangerous elements are the ones hidden beneath the surface. What is stated out loud is only the tip. The bulk of our reasoning is supported by unspoken beliefs, personal biases, or past experiences that we rarely stop to examine. To recognize assumptions is to make the invisible visible. It requires a diagnostic approach. Look at the checklist provided. Are there hidden beliefs influencing this view? Is there a bias behind the claim? What would change if this assumption were false? For instance, in business, we often assume growth is always good, or our customers value speed above all else. But if those foundations are shaky, the entire strategy built upon them will eventually collapse. Critical thinkers don't judge right or wrong at this stage. They simply name the assumptions so they can be consciously considered. By questioning the underlying why before we move to the how, we prevent ourselves from building complex solutions on top of flawed premises. It's about clearing the deck and ensuring that our starting point is rooted in reality, not just habit or tradition. Phase 2. Evaluating arguments, the scales of logic. Once we've identified our assumptions, we move to the second phase, evaluating arguments. Think of this as a set of scales. On one side, we have the claim. On the other, we must place the weight of evidence and logic. This phase is about testing the structural strength of a claim. It is human nature to be swayed by emotion or charismatic delivery, but the RED model demands that we remain objective. We must ask, is the evidence strong and relevant? Is the source credible? Does the argument rely too much on emotion rather than reason? A critical part of this phase is also looking at what is missing. We must ask, what evidence is being ignored? Or could this be interpreted differently? By systematically running through this diagnostic checklist, we protect ourselves from being misled by persuasive but flawed rhetoric. We learn to spot when someone is confusing correlation with causation, or when they are presenting a straw man argument. The goal of evaluating arguments isn't to win a debate, but to ensure that the logic we choose to follow is actually sound. Only arguments that can withstand this level of scrutiny should be allowed to influence our final conclusions. This is where we build the intellectual muscle to see through misinformation. The threat matrix, identifying logical fallacies. To evaluate arguments effectively, we must be able to identify the threat matrix, otherwise known as logical fallacies. These are flaws in reasoning that can make an argument seem persuasive, even when it's fundamentally broken. We categorize these threats into three main areas: attacks and distractions, flawed causation and logic, and emotional and social manipulation. In the attacks category, we see things like the ad hominem, where someone attacks the person instead of the argument, or the red herring, which introduces irrelevant info to distract us. Under flawed causation, we find the slippery slope, where one small step is falsely claimed to lead to a disaster, or false equivalence, which treats two very different things as equal. Finally, social manipulation uses tactics like appeal to authority or appeal to emotion to bypass our logical filters. Recognizing these patterns is like having a radar system for your brain. When you hear a colleague say, "Everyone is investing in this, so it must be a good choice," your bandwagon fallacy alarm should go off. By mastering this matrix, you become immune to the most common traps of persuasion. You stop being a passive consumer of information and become an active, critical evaluator of everything you hear in the boardroom or the media. Phase 3. Drawing conclusions. The polished gem. We now reach the final stage of the RED framework, drawing conclusions. If you have recognized your assumptions and evaluated the arguments, you are finally ready to synthesize that information into a clear, reasoned judgment. Look at the emerald on the slide. It represents a conclusion that is multifaceted, brilliant, and hard to break. A good conclusion is never rushed. It is the result of balancing clarity, caution, and confidence. To reach this stage, you must run through one last diagnostic filter. Does the conclusion follow logically from the evidence? Have I explored alternative explanations? What are the long-term implications? Crucially, you must acknowledge the limits of your knowledge. A critical thinker is comfortable saying, based on the 70% of data we have, this is the most logical path. But here is the 30% we are still guessing about. This transparency is what separates a leader from a gambler. By documenting your conclusion alongside the logic that built it, you create a trail of accountability. You aren't just making a guess, you are making a high-resolution decision that can be defended and refined as new information emerges. This is the reality we saw on the first slide, a conclusion that is as solid and valuable as a gemstone. Case study: the square tire provocation. To see the RED model in action, let's look at a seemingly absurd case study: square tires. This exercise is designed to show how breaking assumptions leads to better evaluation. We start with the statement, tires should be redesigned to be square instead of circular. In phase 1, we recognize the assumption. We assume tires must be round to function. But why? Could a square tire rethink traditional design for artistic or educational purposes? Moving to phase 2, we build our evaluation matrix. For square tires, we might argue they offer a symbolic rethink of design. Against them, we have overwhelming evidence. Circular tires provide continuous road contact, while square ones create mechanical inefficiency and immense vibration. The engineering principles of physics clearly support the round wheel. Finally, in phase 3, we draw our conclusion. Based on physics and real-world application, the idea of square tires is impractical. However, the process of questioning the roundness assumption allowed us to re-verify why round wheels are the standard. This demonstrates that critical thinking isn't about always finding a new answer. Often, it's about proving that the old answer is still the most logical choice by subjecting it to modern scrutiny. It turns a habit into a reasoned choice. Case study: AI in schools. Let's apply the framework to a more complex, real-world issue: the impact of artificial intelligence in schools. The initial statement is that AI will be a net positive for education. In the recognizing assumptions phase, we identify that this assumes schools are technologically ready and that the impact will be uniform across different socioeconomic groups. Moving to the evaluation matrix, we weigh the 4 arguments. AI can personalize education, reduce teacher burnout through automation, and provide 24/7 tutoring support. On the against side, we must consider the risk of reduced human interaction, privacy concerns regarding student data, and the potential to widen the digital divide between rich and poor districts. Our argument conclusion at this stage suggests that while the benefits are powerful, they are not guaranteed and are highly dependent on context. Finally, we draw conclusions. The impact of AI in schools is not a simple yes or no. It is a mixed success that depends entirely on responsible implementation, adequate resources, and a focus on equity. This case study shows how the RED framework prevents us from taking a black and white stance on complex issues. It forces us to acknowledge the nuances and build a conclusion that is as complex as the problem it solves. Deep dive. Mastering the 15 logical fallacies. To truly excel at Phase 2, evaluating arguments, one must be intimately familiar with this table of 15 logical fallacies. These are the tools of the sophist, someone who uses clever but false arguments. Let's highlight a few critical ones for the professional world. The false dilemma is frequent in strategy meetings. Either we cut the budget or we fail. This ignores the middle ground of optimization. The hasty generalization is common in marketing. I met 2 unhappy customers, so the whole product line is a disaster. This takes a tiny sample size and applies it to the whole. In the realm of ethics, we often see the tu quoque, or appeal to hypocrisy. You tell me to save energy, but you drive a big car. While the person might be a hypocrite, it doesn't make their argument for saving energy logically invalid. By studying this list, you learn to separate the messenger from the message and the style from the substance. I encourage you to keep this list visible during high-stakes negotiations. When you can name a fallacy in real time, even if only in your own head, you immediately regain control of the logical narrative. You move from being sold an idea to evaluating it with cold, hard logic. The RED Framework Toolkit, Implementation Strategy. Finally, we arrive at the RED Framework Toolkit, your canvas for practical implementation. To move from theory to results, you must integrate this canvas into your team's workflow. Here is the step-by-step procedure for a successful RED session. Step 1. Define the initial statement. At the top of the canvas, write down the claim or proposal exactly as it was presented. Don't polish it yet. Capture the raw idea. Step 2. The assumption audit. Set a timer for 10 minutes. Use the Recognizing Assumptions box to brainstorm every single thing that must be true for this proposal to work. Use the iceberg diagnostic. What are we taking for granted? Is there a bias here? If you are in a team, encourage devil's advocacy. Have one person specifically try to find hidden assumptions that others might be too close to see. Step 3. The argument debate. Move to the central matrix. Divide your team into 2 groups, for and against. Even if everyone likes the idea, one group must find the strongest logical arguments against it. This prevents groupthink. Fill the boxes with evidence, not just opinions. Once the matrix is full, look for logical fallacies. Is the for side using an appeal to emotion? Is the against side using a slippery slope? Filter those out to reach the argument conclusion, a summary of the valid logic remaining. Step 4. The synthesis. Finally, move to drawing conclusions. This is where you look at the remaining valid logic and the vetted assumptions. Ask, does the conclusion follow? If the against arguments were logically stronger, the conclusion might be to pivot or reject. If the for arguments held up under scrutiny, you can move forward with reasoned confidence. Pro tip for implementation. Use this canvas for your most expensive or risky decisions first. By making the RED process a visible part of your decision process, literally drawing it on a whiteboard or using this digital canvas, you change the culture of your organization. You move away from who has the most authority to whose logic is the most robust. This toolkit is your insurance policy against expensive mistakes. It ensures that when you finally draw conclusions, you are holding a polished emerald of a decision, ready to be implemented with the full weight of logic behind it. Your journey to high-resolution reality starts with the very next decision you place on this canvas.